USS Mississinewa, Ao-59, was the first of two United States Navy ships of the name. She was a T-3S-2A1 auxiliary oiler of the U.S. Navy, laid down on October 5, 1943 by the Bethlehem Sparrows Point Shipyard Incorporated, Sparrows Point, Maryland, launched on March 28, 1944, sponsored by Miss Margaret Bence, and commissioned on May 18, 1944. Mississinewa was commanded by Captain Philip G. Beck. Mississinewa began her brief but active wartime service on May 18, 1944. Having completed shakedown in the Chesapeake Bay, she sailed for Aruba, Netherlands, West Indies, to take on her first cargo. Filling her cargo tanks on 23 to 24 June, she continued on to the Pacific Ocean, arriving Pearl Harbor on July 10. As a unit of Service Squadron 10, Servron 10, she then steamed to Eniwetok, where she first fueled ships of the 3rd Fleet. On August 25, she got underway for Mayonas, where she supplied fuel and stores and delivered mail to ships of TF-38, the Fast Carrier Force, 32 and 31 during the assault and occupation of the Palaus. Returning to Mayonas on September 30, she replenished her tanks and again headed north to refuel TF-38 as that force struck at Japanese shipping and shore installations in the Philippines, on Taiwan, and in the Ryukyus in preparation for the Philippine campaign. On October 19, having emptied her tanks into ships scheduled to take part in the landings at Leyte, she sailed to Ulithi in the Caroline Islands, her new base. Thence in early November, Mississinewa sailed her last fueling at sea assignment, returning on the 15th. The next day, she replenished her cargo tanks, filling them almost to capacity with 404,000 U.S. gallons, 1,530 cubic meters, of aviation gas, 9,000 barrels, 1,400 cubic meters, of diesel fuel, and 90,000 barrels, 14,000 cubic meters, of fuel oil. 4 days later, November 20th, she was still anchored in berth number 131. At 5:47, shortly after Reveille, a heavy explosion rocked the oiler. Seconds later, fumes in an aviation gas cargo tank ignited, causing a second explosion. Massive flames immediately burst from midship forward. Bunker sea oil immediately engulfed the ship, with aviation gas on top of that. The aviation gas acted like a wick. Fanned by a light wind, the fire spread aft quickly. A few minutes later, the fires reached the after magazine and caused yet another explosion to tear through the ship. The ship was abandoned and soon enveloped in flames over 100 feet 30 meters high. Fleet tugs were immediately brought in to try to extinguish the fire, but in spite of their efforts, at about 9 o'clock the ship slowly turned over and disappeared. 15 minutes later, the fire on the water was out and Ulithi anchorage was again quiet. This ship was the first to be hit by a Japanese Kaidan-man torpedo. The ship sank with a loss of 63 hands as well as the Kaidan pilot. Of the 5 Kaidan sent against U.S. ships, only one was successful, but the explosion and fire from Mississinewa was so great that the Japanese Naval Command back in Tokyo were erroneously informed that 3 aircraft carriers were hit. This resulted in an expansion of the Kaidan program, even though it would not significantly affect the war. Mississinewa was hit in the front starboard bow area, the Kaidan probably released by Japanese submarine I-47 just outside Ulithi Lagoon. Mississinewa received 4 battle stars for World War II service. On April 6, 2001, after a search, the hulk of the ship was found again. It is now treated as a memorial for over 50 sailors whose remains are still there. Later in 2001, in response to concerns voiced by the local government about oil being released from the site, the U.S. Navy led a survey dive to determine the status of the wreck and the potential for environmental damage from the deteriorating hulk. Divers confirmed that the potential for a large release of the tanker's cargo fuel made a recovery attempt necessary. In February 2003, a U.S. Navy salvage team led an expedition to recover as much oil as possible. Divers used hot taps to drill into the oil tanks and removed all accessible oil, nearly 2 million U.S. gallons, 7,600 cubic meters, rendering the wreck safer. The recovered oil was barged back to Singapore, where it was sold for $0.50/gallon to help cover the $11 million salvage costs. The ship was featured on the television shows The Sea Hunters, Deep Sea Detectives, and Dogfights.